You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your still wagering host, Abraham.
And I'm your jackpot host, Shane. Pew-pew.
Ooh, that was a good one. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do, and lately we've been talking for several weeks now, a couple months at least, about the topics of addiction. And we have allowed these conversations to mostly just evolve into these just marathon-long discussions that have happened. But this last time we decided we had gone too far. We had to draw the line somewhere.
Someone had to stop us, and it was us. We stopped us.
Yes. So if you are catching us right now, this is a follow-up to our part 1 episode. We were about to talk about gambling addiction. So we had set up the history of like gambling and casinos and talked a bit about the ideas of like things that were trying to get people into casinos and how gambling sort of developed over time and what it is and all of that. And all that's great, but we didn't actually get to talk about gambling addiction. And so we will have to tackle that today. But first, if you were joining us for the first time, welcome. Most of these episodes will stand on their own. However, because this is a two-parter, it would probably be helpful for you to go back and hear the discussion that preceded this one in the previous episode where we talked about how casinos and gambling work.
Yes.
And nevertheless, this will have a lot of self-contained content as well.
We have been really taking kind of a loose flow format to this show, or the series at least.
I think so.
I think that works really well for this discussion. So today we are finishing up the part on gambling addiction, talking about some of the things like, we're going to talk about a lot of things underneath this. But before we do that, we've got to share some holidays. And the day that you're listening to this episode is Bring Flowers to Someone Day. Who that someone is, I don't know.
That is lovely. Yeah. So, and that means that, by the way, it is May 15th. So just in case you weren't sure what day it is, well, I guess I'm telling you now. It is also Buddha Day.
It's also Dinosaur Day, so it's peace and dinosaurs and flowers. I love that.
Yes. It is Emergency Medical Services Day. That's important.
It's also International Conscientious Objector Day, which I really like.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I can get on board with that. It is International Kangaroo Care Awareness Day. Very important to take care of our kangaroos.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Those things. I mean, well, I don't know. I hear they're kind of mean. They drown things.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they're like a little bit aggressive from what I understand. But no, you should still take care of them. I guess maybe part of the care awareness is like, don't treat them near bodies of water.
There you go.
It's a National Chocolate Chip Day. Love that.
Okay. It is National Juice Slush Day. Sure.
I mean, if you like slushies, I guess. Not my thing. I don't like really sweet, sugary fruit drinks like that, but, you know, everybody's got their thing. It is...
This is a long one.
This is a long one. It is Relive Your Past by listening to the first music you ever bought, no matter what it was, No Excuses Day.
Wow.
What would you be listening to?
Let's see. The first music I ever bought, I think was Chumbawamba.
I actually kind of like that. I think mine was Blink-182, actually.
Oh,
it was Dude Ranch.
I wish that it was Blink-182, but I'm pretty sure that it is Chumbawamba.
That's okay. I mean, Chumbawamba is like a pretty radical punk band, aside from their hit song.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the Tub Thumping album, I think, was the one that I got. So
yeah, I don't know if you have followed their career since then, since you're such a huge fan, but the day that Margaret Thatcher died, they released a specific song celebrating her death.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, they had it recorded for many, many years, and they just were waiting for her to die.
So you get to have Blink-182, and I'm listening to...
I get knocked down, but I get up.
It is also, importantly, International Family Day. That's nice.
Oh, I love that. It is also National Straw Hat Day, which is fun. Stay shady.
It is Food Allergy Awareness Week, so spend 1 week not eating foods that you're allergic to.
I like that. And the rest of the year, just do with it what you will. It's Hospital Week, so go visit your favorite hospital. Sometimes they have good vegan food in their cafeterias.
Do they really?
Because the cafeterias were open 24/7 in this one hospital in Orlando. We would play shows and we would all go to the hospital and eat vegan chicken nuggets together.
Wow. Okay.
We have pictures of us, like 50 of us hanging out in the hospital cafeteria at like midnight with vegan chicken nuggets. It was great. It was such a good time.
That's such a bizarre story. I just really love it. There's so many unexpected twists and turns in just that short story. And just like imagining a bunch of punks sitting around a hospital eating vegan chicken nuggets is pretty funny.
That's exactly what happened.
Okay. It is National Bike to Work Week. I love this so much, and I wish that I biked to work every week.
Technically, I could, but I would just be riding back to my house. I would just do a loop around my neighborhood and then go right back to my house.
Nice.
It's National Women's Health Week. Super important.
Definitely. And Dementia Awareness Week. Also important.
Very, very important. Absolutely.
Now, interestingly, as we said, we're talking about gambling. We're following up our previous discussion on gambling, and today we're talking about gambling addiction. And this episode comes out on May 15th, and this is our 7-year anniversary as a podcast.
Oh,
so
happy birthday, us.
Yeah, happy birthday, us. So I guess this is our 7-year episode, and 7 makes a lot of sense to be talking about gambling, as lucky number 7 is a common thing in gambling circles. So
yeah,
so gambling, yeah, that's why we did it, I guess.
Yeah, there is a really great song by a band called The Scandals, and they have a song called Lucky Sevens. So go listen to that if you like that. If you like kind of like Gainesville drunk punk type of stuff.
And there was a goofy movie called Lucky Number 11 that I don't think had anything to do with gambling, but
no.
Yeah.
That was a fun movie, though. Josh Hartnett's back, apparently. He's doing a new movie for M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh, okay. I mean, could choose a better director probably, but
I don't know. It looks pretty good. It's called Trap, and apparently he's the serial killer in it. Ooh.
Oh, okay. Well, I do think so. He was in the most recent season of Black Mirror.
Okay.
And he played quite the villainous character in that episode. Very ruthless, and that was a lot of fun. I'm pretty sure that was him.
Yeah, I mean, he's great. Go watch his body of work. The Faculty.
Yeah.
Lucky Number 11. 30 Days of Night. Great stuff.
All this is to say we're unpacking more of addiction. Last time we basically talked about everything except gambling addiction. I think we set up clearly the history of casinos, understanding that the history of gambling and wagering, up all the way through how the schedules of reinforcement and the probabilities of gambling really do support, and I think initiate and maintain a high level of engagement that leads to gambling addiction. So it's worth then unpacking and actually diving into here what gambling addiction is. All right, so this is how gambling addiction starts. The casinos are specifically designed to keep you there as long as possible. Initially, it was to prevent you from leaving. Now they're finding they want you to sort of invite yourself in and be comfortable and want to stay. But going back to, again, there are some reinforcers where the motivation does not have to build for very long, and it is very difficult to satisfy that motivation. And money is a really good example of this. This is very effective as a reinforcer. We're pretty much never finished earning it. I don't think anyone has ever said, like, I'm done earning money. Please don't give me any more. Stop here. I've had as much money as I can possibly take. No one has ever said that sentence.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos hasn't even said that.
No, he is not. And that is why he is where he's at.
Right.
Anyway, money's very effective as a reinforcer. We always want to earn it. And if you like the math of, if I pay $1, I could win $50, or even I pay $100, I could win $50,000. That is arguably much better than I could work 3 hours and get $50, or work 2,000 hours and get $50,000, because the amount of input is much smaller for the output than the work one. So like you sort of guarantee your work doing 3 hours of work getting $50 for like the average, I think, where people are sort of averaging their income right now. Versus you work 2,000 hours and get $50,000, and it's like you could put in that time. But with gambling, you could put in just a $100 bill, walk away with that same output, and have spent only 10 minutes at that table.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing that we discover going back to Skinner's work on variable schedules. Right, variable ratio schedules in general what ends up happening is that behavior happens at such a high rate because you never know when the payout's going to come, right? You never know when that reinforcer is going to come. So it gets reinforced just enough every now and again that it kind of maintains that behavior. But this is a little bit different because it's not just the number of responses, it's also response effort. It's also the amount that gets paid out. It's all these other things that play into it on top of just that randomness that goes along with it. And on top of the fact that like a lot of these places tend to be very welcoming now.
Yeah.
As they're starting to like make them welcoming spaces. There's food, there's drink, there's social interaction, there's other reinforcers that happen inside of this too. There's also the ability to decide how much, how often, and when you bet, along with various betting options and those intermittent successes of large payouts. All of that is very enticing. Like it makes sense that like it's very easy to start in this space and go, that felt really good, or I really like that, or that was really fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. I mean, this is a space that you're having fun. It's easy. You can get a lot of money. They often give you free drinks, sometimes free food, sometimes free rooms, sometimes free flights if you gamble enough with them. And in exchange, all you have to do is give them everything you have and then some.
Yeah.
Like, I guess free being used pretty loosely here. But yeah, like you can see how they build in so much opportunity by doing things like trying to hook you in with like all these incentives and offers, and then you go and you play their games that you will ultimately lose more than you will win, but you will be winning along the way.
Right. And beyond that, the more we practice habits, the more ingrained they become. So we kind of see this situation where we start building habits and building routines. And I believe this is the reason why people become, you hear the kind of the phrase stuck in their ways, which is just an excessive routine, right? Like this person is in a routine, they're in a habit, and they're kind of doing this often, and it's very, very, it's in strength, right? Like that is like such a strengthened behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Those chains often become like almost like a single unit. Like once you start, you almost can't stop. You just go through the routine of doing this thing, then this thing, then this thing, etc. And for some people, that becomes really difficult to even want to escape. They're pretty happy just following their routine. It requires low effort, low thinking. You can proceed it through it efficiently, etc.
Right.
So as we practice doing any pattern of behaviors, particularly those that we find rewarding, the cues and patterns themselves become rewarding. So some people have found that quitting smoking can be aided by replacing the habit of lighting up a cigarette by going through the motions of lighting up, but replacing the cigarette with something with little or no nicotine in it. And it's because part of the smoking is not just the chemical addiction to nicotine, but it's the routine of getting to go outside and take a break from work and, pull out your cigarettes and tap the box and then pull one out and then get your lighter.
Right.
Like all of that is a routine that you practice a lot. I mean, you're doing this, if people who are even light smokers are doing this several times a day, every single day. Like there's never a time when they don't go through that series of steps that form that habit. And so that's why it can be helpful to, as if you're trying to quit smoking, is essentially replace those steps with something that's identical. It just doesn't have the same sort of deleterious outcome.
Right. And also too, on top of all that, you've also got this issue of gamification, right? Which is when we can make more things more engaging by reward systems and kind of gamifying behaviors. And there's like there's actually a lot of studies on gamification. There's a really great study on improving lunchroom food waste and like where food went inside of a classroom with just kind of gamifying like lunchroom cleanliness.
Yeah. And I found this really interesting study that looked at gamifying people's exercises in physical therapy. And so essentially what they did is they made sort of like a point system for where you would sort of be able to see how well you're doing the exercise, and it would give you feedback in terms of like points. And then the if you met certain thresholds, you'd be able to maximize your points. And this was for people who would be undergoing physical therapy. And that one of the things that physical therapists struggle with is getting people to adhere to the stretches and exercises that they prescribe. And so what they did in the study is they're like, well, what if we sort of gamified it? What if we made it more of like a challenge and that sort of thing? And they found that they were able to get the highest rates of voluntary engagement and with the highest integrity when they had sort of gamified the exercises by sort of having them earn points. And it was kind of just a silly little thing, but it was really effective. And this study just came out, I think, 2021. Okay. So pretty recently. And this is actually published like peer-reviewed journal.
That's wild. I mean, and it's one of those things where I think of like going to the gym. Like I get points every time I go to the gym. I get incentives and rewards. I don't have to like a high score or anything, but I've seen like, some step counters, like Fitbit will have like competitions where they'll gamify it and then people will get like 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 steps to kind of like compete with their friends.
Yeah.
That's a powerful tool. Gamification is a powerful tool, more than people, I think, give it credit for.
Yeah. I would like to use it more in life, but yeah, I just haven't unfortunately built in the time to use it.
Yeah. Now, neurologists have found that there is excessive expression of the protein delta FBJ, murine osteosarcoma, viral oncogene homolog B. Good Lord.
Catchy.
Just a great name for a band. Okay, so just real quick, just to reiterate, delta FBJ, murine osteosarcoma, viral oncogene homolog B, which is just delta FOSB. That's not even short either, but that's shorter than what I just said.
Yeah.
Okay, what does all that mean? Because now you've all glazed over. This protein is implicated in numerous addictions, including chemical addictions to drugs, as well as in people with behavioral addictions like gambling. So the neurologists have found that there is this excessive expression of this protein across people with different types of addiction, which you find the similarities of chemical addictions and behavioral addictions like this in this kind of space, which is, I think, really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think this was part of how they sort of built the foundation for the case that gambling should be treated as an addiction disorder, is because it has so many other markers of other addiction disorders, including these biological ones.
Right.
And so they look at that expression of that protein and say, like, look, this is here whether or not you're addicted to heroin or whether or not you're addicted to slot machines or, gambling and whatever thing. They see the same sort of occurrence there. Another interesting one I found here is a gambling specialist and neurologist named David Nutt. He conducted MRI studies of the brains of gambling addicts, and what he was looking at was they would basically have them play these virtual gambling tasks while they were in the in the MRI machine. And he reported that there was surprisingly little difference in the activity of brain of someone who is anticipating a win versus accomplishing a win.
Oh, wow.
In this. Yeah, right. So basically it said it looks pretty much the same whether they're like anticipating the outcome or even achieving the outcome that they're looking for.
Yeah, so basically what that is saying is, in kind of this entire section, is that the habit of gambling itself is kind of a self-maintaining thing. Even significant, consistent losses are not enough to end the behavior and might even perpetuate it as the person pursues the next remedial win, because they're reinforced by the anticipation of the win, whether it's to get the jackpot or to make up for the loss. This is a situation where you don't have to win to get addicted.
Yeah, exactly. Because it becomes that like the actual gaming itself is like the win is not as much the reason to do it anymore.
Right.
It's part of it. Like if there were no wins, it would be unlikely that it would persist. But they get about as much satisfaction from the anticipation of the win as they do from the actual win. I think it's almost sort of like buyer's remorse. Like you're so excited to get this new thing and then you finally get it and you're like, oh, that's cool. And it's like it was the looking forward to getting it that you were like really had you hooked.
Right.
And then once you get it, you're like happy that you got it, but you're just not that excited about it anymore. And it's not to say that it was not something you wanted. It's just like once you finally get there, you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's a thing I can check off now.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely shows up here. And part of it, I think, again, trying to speak really clearly to the behavioral angle of this is considering that like there's so many features of the environment. There's the sounds, there's the process. And as we're talking about with smoking and all of these other things, going through the habit that is the routine of all the steps of gambling, all of those things, they sort of become a network of reinforcers, even though they're sort of secondary and they're not, most of them aren't tangible. A lot of them aren't, or they're very ephemeral. Like they don't last very long. And a lot of these things, they just become like they are cues for the experience of gaming and gambling. And that can be sufficient to create the motivation to want to engage. And I kind of imagine like, if we were to say like, okay, let's start stripping away this context and see what changes. If we go in and we just take out like you never win anymore, you just always lose, how long would it persist? A while, but it would not persist indefinitely. If we're like, let's get rid of all of the sounds and the visual appeal, and basically we'll have you just put your money in a black box, and it may or may not spit out some kind of outcome. Like basically you just put it in, you wait 30 seconds, and then it'll say nope, or like you'll get some money and say, will it persist? Probably for a while, but I don't know that it would even like it may not maintain that well, and it may not last. It probably wouldn't build at all to the point of addiction if that was the way that gambling happened.
And I think those points are really valid, and I think that makes sense too. And I think there's another part of this where, I think that we're just looking at it from the perspective of like this behavior happens in a particular context and there's cues and stuff like that. But I don't think this is accounting for things like risk addiction, where like people just like risky things. And so there is that piece where it's like, I guess maybe what I'm saying is that by itself, gambling alone is probably not the thing that is as much of the problem. It's probably all the other things that are kind of bleeding into the behavior and leading to the behavior. And that's kind of what behavioral addictions are, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got a response that is linked to cues, motivations, reinforcement, rewards, biological systems, environmental systems, all of these things that are happening. Now add to that, like, for those folks that are high risk, like the high risk, high reward type of situations, like
the thrill seekers, the
adrenaline junkies, like those folks, like, and those are layperson terms, but the truth is for some people, there is a thrill of anticipating a really big win when it's all on the line. Right? Like you got a lot to lose. So like so there is that piece where it's like that win. Oh man, if I win this, like talk about the reward. It's millions of dollars. I get this. You see this in not just in casinos, you see this in street racing where people are racing for cars. You see this in situations where people are just risky. People risk their health.
Yeah.
There are things that people bet on that are not just monetary. Most gambling addiction focuses on monetary and maybe some tangible things, but like people bet their lives on making, risky liaisons with folks and stuff like that. Like there's all kinds of things that happen inside of this kind of like gambling, what people are gambling with. It's not just money, but that anticipation of like that possible reward is so intoxicating or so powerful a reward in itself that you don't even really need the reward all the time.
That's such a great point. You're exactly right. I think there's a certain amount of like the risk is because you start usually low stakes. Like, okay, like I lose $5. I could tolerate losing $5.
Sure.
And you start like, then it's like, well, that wasn't, $5, I guess, isn't really high stakes. It doesn't feel as exciting anymore. I'm going to go up to $20, then 100, then 1,000. Then it's like, now I'm playing really big. I'm betting like my car. And it's like every time you manage to usually, not every time, but like you squeak by with enough wins that the losses feel less aversive. And the risk itself becomes the sort of fun thing. I kind of wonder, like, people who vote in elections, sometimes I'm like, maybe there's people who are supporting some of these candidates who are clearly the worst people who have ever lived.
Right.
And they're like, it's all about the risk. They're like, I just want to feel something. Like I'm willing to put my life and the life of everyone else in the line just for the thrill of embracing the chaos.
Sure. That's gotta be it.
Yeah, that must be the explanation. So anyway, and speaking of embracing chaos, here's some ads. Okay, so I think we've more or less established how I think the important and relevant features of understanding sort of gambling and what gambling addiction starts to look like. So another, I think, important piece here is talking then about treatment.
Because anytime we talk about what can be described as a problem, we also want to look at solutions. So when we start unpacking addiction treatment, we could probably do its own episode, which, we've already broken this episode up into a million parts. So it is very possible we could end up in there at some point in time. But we are going to revisit kind of a little bit about what has been done or what is being done. But it's also worth looking at the history of attempts to treat various addictions. That will be a lot of fun. But behavior addictions are a little different and often include a lot of unique treatments. A lot of kind of people going, well, maybe this will work.
Yeah.
And then doing something really wacky.
And as I said, like we'll probably spend a whole discussion at some point in a separate episode talking about the history of treatments for addiction. So this will be sort of a relatively brief overview as it pertains to gambling specifically.
Right.
And also, this isn't really necessarily unpacking the history. This is just sort of talking about what is out there. So gambling and other behavioral addictions in general are often characterized as impulsivity or being impulsive, right?
Sure.
And this is something that is quantitatively described by behavior analysts using something called the delayed discounting model. Essentially, this states that the longer one must wait for a reward, the less valuable that reward becomes. Have we talked about delayed discounting before in like a full treatment length? Because I know we've talked about doing one on it, but I don't think we have.
I think that we've talked about it a few times in terms of like it's come up in certain episodes, but I don't think that we've ever done like a full on episode on it, which we probably should.
Yes. Yeah. I think it would be worth doing a deep dive on that model if we haven't already, because it's there's a lot that's been done on this and it's been applied to a lot of different things.
Right.
But anyway, as I said, essentially the idea here is that people tend to, if they have to wait for a reward, even if it's larger, they'll tend to choose the reward that's more immediate, even if it's smaller. So that's called delayed discounting. And the people who are more willing to choose those sort of smaller, sooner rewards over the larger, later rewards, they describe that behavior as being impulsive. And it suggests that interventions that focus on impulse control may be effective at reducing gambling behaviors if people who gamble are, in fact, impulsive.
Right. And so far and away, the most common and most researched of the interventions that are used for gambling are CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, for those of you who are not familiar, in which the intention of CBT, this intervention, is to A, correct cognitive distortions about gambling, B, develop problem-solving skills, C, teach social skills, and D, teach relapse prevention. So this kind of CBT package is designed to really address maybe what they describe as what they think is the core problem, which is a cognitive distortion of it, not necessarily a neurological addiction or a behavioral, like all the reinforcers and stuff. It's actually looking specifically at like how people are thinking about addiction, changing that, creating skills, and actually doing behavioral skills to address that kind of the thought pattern and all that, and go from there.
Yes. And I think, the more contemporary acceptance and commitment training and therapy would suggest that you can't change people's thoughts. But what you can do is you can have them be less distressed by those thoughts by essentially allowing themselves to consider those thoughts as just being thoughts and then to engage in alternative behaviors.
Right.
That's one important feature I think that you see most commonly is that cognitive behavioral therapy is really, really frequently cited as an important component to treatment for behavioral addiction or any kind of it's for lots of things, but for as far as behavioral addiction with respect to gambling goes, that one comes up.
Yeah.
Another common strategy here is called motivational interviewing. We did an episode on this back in episode 247, so like a little over 100 episodes ago.
That's all.
Wow. Yeah, that's all.
That's crazy.
And that consists of conversations to take the person's perspective and help them identify their own reasons for wanting to change their behavior. And that's how motivational interviewing sort of works.
Yeah. Something that is in the research right now is guided self-help, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's just kind of mostly workbooks. I say research, it's just out there.
Yeah.
But it is something that people are doing. It's just kind of looking through workbooks and looking at different scenarios and practices and role play scenarios and kind of working through those with maybe with some guidance.
Yeah. It's intended to sort of help you answer the kinds of questions that you might encounter in a therapeutic environment in such a way that you can engage with it at your own pace, on your own time, and it may have a similar impact. If it was that effective, I think that those would be much more commonly talked about. I think that it does work really well for some people. So if you're one of those, seek those out. But for others, they need something different.
For sure.
There's another strategy here called personalized feedback. And this is a strategy to measure and compare people's behavior to other people's behavior. And it's sort of specifically designed to try and help them see the discrepancy in what they're doing compared to what other people are doing. So they're sort of saying like, I think this is relevant particularly for people who think that they don't have a problem or that their problem isn't very much of a problem, is they might say like, okay, well, let's just look at how much you gamble relative to how much most people gamble. Like you are there every night this week. Most people did not go even one night this week. So
right.
That's higher than average. I think the rationale and the intention of this as a component to intervention is to help people, I think, recognize what may be considered a pathology in their behavior.
Right. There's also relapse prevention, which is kind of an isolated component of CBT. It seems like that. But what it does is it consists of helping the individual identify high-risk situations that are likely to result in gambling behavior. So essentially what they're saying is, hey, like if you walk into the scenario, you know that you are highly likely or you are at risk of doing X, Y, and Z. Like I think of like Charles Bukowski. Like if Charles Bukowski didn't want to gamble on horses, then putting him in a racetrack would be a problem, right?
Sure.
So what they would say is, oh, okay, you know that you bet on horses and bet on horses often. Maybe don't go here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if you do go here, here are some strategies that you might use to prevent you from gambling. And here's X, Y, and Z. And it's kind of like looking at that spot where it's like, what are the high risk situations and how can you address that with some skills that you need to learn?
That actually specifically segues beautifully into the last one here, which is that gambling is a time-consuming habit, and it also one that often requires a specific geographical location, unless you're gambling online, of course. But like you have to, and what I mean by that is you have to go to the casino, you have to go to the horse racing place, like to place a bet. You have to go somewhere to do it, and it often takes time to do it. Like you're there for an hour, a few hours, maybe. So there's a lot that is involved in engaging in gambling. That's actually part of the reason it persists in the first place.
Right.
So being that that's the case, one strategy that people have used as far as trying to treat gambling addiction is to plan with these sort of quote unquote activity schedules is the sort of the idea. And with activity schedules, the whole point is to avoid the kinds of downtime that might enable someone making the choice to gamble. You could sort of think of it as like a distraction. It's just, can I keep you so busy that you don't find the time or opportunity to build gambling into your schedule? And I think that to a point, that could work. I think you could get people who, if they want to quit gambling, they're willing to adhere to a schedule. You probably could get some success with giving them enough other things to do. But I also know that like people will find a way to sacrifice something else if they can, if they're like motivated enough. So like if you have managed to fill up their whole day such that like from waking to going to bed, they did not have an opportunity to choose gambling, they might then choose gambling instead of sleep. And so they're like, well, that's one thing they can definitely control. So it's not to say that it wouldn't work. It very well might for some people, but that is a consideration around that.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Now, one of the things to consider is that when we start looking at activity schedules, one of the things that we have to put in our activity schedules is ads. And so we're sorry that that's built in and it might distract you from other things that are going on, but here's an ad just in case it works for you.
So we have some more sort of interesting, I think, tidbits to pull in and talk about here related to gambling and gambling addiction. But we had talked about this whole delayed discounting model. And the reason that that was relevant to gambling is because we were saying that people who are more impulsive may be more likely to gamble, right? And so there was a study that I found where what they did is they basically took people who were already sort of self-proclaimed gambling addicts and they gave them a delayed discounting task, meaning they would propose hypotheticals. Would you rather have, $1 now or $10 2 weeks from now? Right. And is sort of how those scenarios are set up. It's not exactly that, but they look for like at what point, how long in time would it have to be before more money stops being worth it because you had to wait so long? And then they basically say that that's how much the value of that reward has diminished. And so that's how the whole thing is set up. Anyway, point being that in this study, what they did with people who were gamblers is that they did find that gamblers tended to have a steeper discounting rate, meaning that they were more impulsive, is how they would describe that, than people who were not gamblers. Okay. And so that did sort of show. Now, this is maybe a chicken and egg sort of situation. Were they gambling because they were impulsive, or did they become more impulsive because they were gambling a lot? Probably a little bit of both. At least we know that they were gambling at some point, and then they engaged in impulsive behaviors. So that could be the direction, but it's possible possible that they found gambling so rewarding because they sort of had that impulsivity. But again, who knows whether that's a relevant way to sort of unpack gambling necessarily, but it was something that they found in that study at least.
That's super interesting. I mean, I wish, I maybe the word's not wish. I'm glad to see that behavior analysis is trying to tackle gambling, or at least address it in some conceptual way, because, and that's actually feel like such a big part of behavior analytic literature is like looking at gambling and like the schedules and the behaviors and all that stuff too. Like, I feel like it's one of kind of the maybe more underscored, but, and not necessarily underscored. What's the word I'm looking for? Underappreciated, under discussed, maybe. There's a lot of gambling research is what I'm saying. And we don't talk about it a lot.
It's true. There is a ton. It is interesting that I think there have been some behavior analysts who were really interested in gambling, and they did, sort of make their careers mostly about that, at least for a while. And it's never really comprised a huge amount of the literature. And I think it's because, if I had to guess, of sort of where funding is for different types of interventions inside of behavior analysis services. Gambling has not been high on that list, I think. And so research and treatment have not been as sort of thoroughly informed by the work that's been done inside of this. But I do appreciate that people have put in the time and all that.
Yeah, I think it's the mobs.
That's what it is.
It's the mobs that are putting a kibosh on it.
We don't want you to be successful at this intervention, so they're shutting it down.
Yeah, they show up and they're like, you keep doing this research, we're going to break your legs.
There is another piece of this that I didn't really talk about in the probabilities section, but is worth discussing, I think, as far as understanding treatment here, is there's something called the near miss effect, and at least that's been talked about in research. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so the idea here is that particularly on slot machines, this is where they've done the majority of, matter of fact, another study I found by Dixon and colleagues, like 2009 maybe, they did a survey of the type of research on gambling that's been done, and like 85% of it or more is on slot machines. So anyway, the near miss effect pertains to slot machines. The idea here is that those like drums that roll that have the pictures on them, like the sevens, people are looking for like the 3 sevens in a row or something. Or it says jackpot on it, maybe. Yeah. That the near miss effect is that you get 2 of those, and then the third one was just off the line. Yeah. And so it was really close to getting it. And the idea was that would maintain gambling more if people sort of got really close to winning, but not quite there. Sure. And I think that the research on that I've seen, because I sort of looked up a little bit of it for this, has been a little bit mixed in terms of whether the actual effect is maintaining gambling. Because just speaking behavior analytically, looking at schedules, I would expect that only the actual payouts that maintained gambling. And to be clear, I don't know if we've talked about this in here, but a payout often, there are tons of payouts that are not a jackpot. So like, let's say you put in $20 in a slot machine. A really common outcome is that you win like $1.50. Yeah. And it's like, so you went in with 20, you pulled the lever or you hit the button is more common anymore. And your $20 went to, now you have $21.50 in there. I'm like, that's not a huge jackpot. That's not a huge payoff. Most people are not going to cash out at that point. No. Now they're going to place more bets. They're like, well, that was pretty cool. I have $1.50. So I'm going to place some more bets. And it drops down. They're down to like $10 left after all their gambling. And the next one hits and it's like, you won $5. Like, wow, that's even more than last time. I got $5. Yeah. Your overall pot's only at $15 now, but like, hey, he has a big win. So I think that the thing that maintains gambling more is a bunch of small wins that are not jackpots. And even as I said, the research I saw in the near miss seemed to suggest that like for some people that did seem like they were responding to it as if it were a win in terms of how it affected their behavior. Yeah. But I think it's not consistent enough of an effect to really explain the addiction part. And maybe once you're at full blown addiction mode where like the anticipation is as satisfying as the win, then maybe at that point, that's where the near miss is likely to maintain. But it seems like it's not predictably a variable that's likely to like have people engage in more gambling.
I remember the first time I went to Vegas, And I set some really clear rules because I'm somebody who can get sucked into stuff really quickly. So I was like, I know I'm going to spend X amount of money and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I was telling my wife, and I know how to play the games, but I'm not confident enough to walk up to a table and be like, I'm going to play this game.
Sure.
So slot machines are kind of my go-to, which, I'm sure that I am just throwing money away. But it was one of those things where I put like $20 in and I ended up losing like all of it, and then put another $20 in, and then like won $10 on it. So like I got my 20 plus another 10. And I was like, and I was telling my wife, I was like, I won $50. She's like, no, you won $10, but you lost 20. Like you lost $20. Like I was like, no, I won this. And she's like, no, that's not. I was like, and I knew I was kind of just egging her on and being that person. But I was like, no, I won $10. I won this. And she's like, you are ridiculous. So you can't go to Vegas anymore. So
there you go.
Yeah. So when the next time I went, I just didn't gamble. I was like, I'm good. I don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, the rule I always set for myself, which did work, it worked until it didn't, was that I was like, I'm willing to lose this amount of money. Like I'd have like $20 in cash, right? And so then I would take that and I would gamble with that. Once I lost it, I was just done. I would walk out. And if I made more than that, then I would pocket the original amount and then just gamble off of my winnings. Yeah. So like if I put in 20 and I won 20, I'd put 20 in my pocket and then I'd just play off the 20. And that way, worst case scenario, I'd walk out with exactly as much money as I'd walked in with.
Right.
And I would have just had fun playing games. That was a rule that I was able to follow until I stopped following it and chased the losses, and that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah.
But I think if you use that strategy, you're more likely to end up at least not really regretting a bunch of decisions.
Sure.
Okay, we do have some interesting tidbits to get to, I think, but given that I don't even know how much time it's been some amount of time, we should probably take an ad break. Let's do an ad break.
Why not?
Okay, so some fun things. The first one I'm going to share, I actually did not include in our notes here, is I had found another study on gambling that I read where what they did, this confused me greatly. I'm not going to throw the authors under the bus or the journal, but suffice it to say, it's a pretty big journal and one that we both know.
Okay.
In this journal, they sort of started by talking about the problem of gambling addiction. And then the point of the study that they did was to teach people to count cards better so that they'd be better at blackjack. Yeah. I was like,
that's going to get you thrown out of a casino real quick.
Yes. And also I'm like, this is illegal. It also is like giving people who already have a problem a reason to do it more.
Right.
Like not even just making it easier or more available, you're actually making it more enticing. So I was like, I don't know that I would support this as being something that we like try and help people with necessarily. I don't, but I also on the like helping people be more successful maybe is good. I don't know. It felt weird.
I feel like that's one of those discussions about like ethics and research ethics and also scope of competence. Like you have to know the legal boundaries of whatever you're studying. I wonder what kind of permissions they would have had to get to do that because like they've got to know that it was illegal.
Right. Yeah. So it was a hypothetical. Like they weren't actually gambling addicts that were the people they were working with. They weren't actually going to casinos, but they were like teaching them in the simulation how to count cards better, and they got better at it as an outcome of practice. Which,
that's wild.
Surprise. Yeah, I was like, this is a kind of question that makes me think. I'm like, how did? I just, I don't want to like. Sure, they did fine designing their study, but it just seems like that's not like a great thing to teach people who may find themselves in a position of like addiction to do.
Right. That's not the tool that you give somebody.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was interesting.
Maybe it was a harm reduction.
Maybe that was it. They just like lose less money.
Yeah, I don't think it was. One thing that is super interesting is people will actually gamble longer at slot machines that smell good as opposed to slot machines that smell bad or even neutral. That makes logical sense.
Yeah.
I've also seen situations where like it might not be the slot machine that smells bad, maybe it's the area around the slot machine that smells bad. Like if somebody is like, on a streak and they piss themselves at the slot machine, people do that. And so they're like, they don't want to lose their spot, they don't want to lose their streak, so like the area, maybe the carpet smells like urine, but they get caught really quick and thrown out, usually, if that's the case. But
yeah,
people like to hang out where it smells good. I mean, Disney's got this figured out. Like, if you walk down Main Street of Magic Kingdom, they're pumping in fresh popcorn smells, like, or sweets or bakery stuff. Like, they pump in the scents to get people to buy stuff. Like, smell is a really powerful thing.
Yeah. I understand why they would try and leverage that.
Yeah.
So Nevada is actually not the only state with legalized gambling. Louisiana is also a state that has statewide legalized casinos. Now, that being said, 48 of the 50 U.S. states do have some sort of gambling. The only two that have no form of gambling whatsoever are like diametrically opposed in how I think of them politically. And that is Hawaii and Utah. And they don't even have a lottery or online gambling.
Wow.
Yeah. So Nevada and Louisiana have full statewide legalized casinos. Most other states allow some form of gambling, at least online, or they'll have like a designated spot where you can potentially go gamble. Only Hawaii and Utah, you will find no gambling of any sort.
That's fascinating. Yeah, Hawaii and Utah, two very different places.
Yeah, like so different.
Like so different on every level.
The only thing they have in common is that they're like close to saltwater, I guess.
Which is funny because like Utah really shouldn't have that designation, but here we are.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're landlocked.
Geography's weird. Yeah, they're landlocked. Why are they near saltwater? Oh, wait.
Yeah,
there's a big
very
lake.
salty water.
Now, non-human animals do not seem to do anything like gambling, although some primates will engage in suboptimal choice making and gambling-like tasks. So, like, you'll see that there's like maybe like a kernel of that, but not necessarily a gambling type of behavior, at least on the level that we understand it. So.
Yeah, and so a lot of gambling research they've tried to do with animals, and they seem to have a really hard time getting animals to gamble because it's a fairly complex language type thing to understand. Giving up something in the hopes that you might get something more, that requires you understanding exchange, understanding temporal delay, understanding now versus then. Like,
right.
Those foundational components are things that most animals do not demonstrate the ability to do the way that we do them.
Right.
And so gambling just means nothing to them in that way, at least in the way they've tried to arrange it in the research so far. Maybe they'll figure it out and they'll find like, oh, it just turns out that all you have to do is like do this thing, and then they'll gamble like crazy.
Right.
Anyway, so the closest they've gotten is to get them to make suboptimal choices, essentially meaning that they could optimize their rewards by doing X, but instead they chose to do Y, which had less than optimal rewards.
Right.
So they sort of then equate that to gambling in some ways. But yeah, interestingly, humans seem to be the only animals that do anything like gambling exactly.
That's, I mean, just fascinating. And I think that goes back to like our discussion for our patrons where we're talking about language being a powerful tool. If you want to see that discussion, join the Patreon because we discussed it a whole lot.
Yes, well, that is true. All right. I think that's all that we have to talk about with respect to gambling addiction. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up today?
No, I think that covers it. We covered quite a bit.
We did. All right. Well, credit where credit is due. If you would like to support this podcast, then you can head over to our website and pick up some merch. You can join us on Patreon. You can leave a rating and review. You can subscribe. You can tell a friend about us. If you do join us on Patreon, we're going to read your name because we really appreciate the people who have been so generous with their money and their time with us, who have really taken on supporting us as a show. And that includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, Christy, and Michelle. Thank you all so much.
Y'all are the best.
And of course, I could not do this without my team of people writing and fact checking from Shane, Jess, and myself. Jess is back with us. She was a writer a long time ago and is back in the crew, which is great. Audio editing and production comes from Justin Greenhouse. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. If you would like to talk to us about gambling or gambling addiction or anything else that we got right in here, or just send us compliments, you can do that. You can email us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com. You can reach out to us on the social media platforms. If you like to complain about us, you can go over to Truth Social where no one will hear you.
Perfectly fine.
Yep, and that's totally fine. Of course, we're happy to hear constructive criticism. You can reach out to us with that too. Anyway, thank you all very much for listening, and thank you for recording with me today, Shane. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we get to some recommendations?
Nope. I think that covers it on that front.
All right. That is gambling. We have done it. So let's recommend some things.
Recommendations.
My recommendation is a record. By the time this episode is out, it will have been released. But it's a band I've always really enjoyed, and I think that they were really fascinating, kind of interesting group of musicians. And that band is called Into It Over It. I don't know if you ever listened to them, but I think you would actually really like them, just from like a music standpoint. Like, I think that they're just like a fascinating kind of like Midwest emo style, but like they're musicians, like just really good musicians that do really cool things. So, and they've just kind of every album they've put out has gotten progressively more interesting.
Wow. Love that.
Yeah. So they're called Into It Over It. And on May 3rd, they put out a full-length LP called Interesting Decisions 2020 to 2023. And this is what they said about the album. They said, here's an album that we've been excited about for some time. Into It Over It have said that in the studio for many years, if you cannot make a good decision, make an interesting one. And so this album is like, which I was like, that's actually really an interesting way to put it. And so they originally, it was this guy, Evan Thomas Weiss, who was like, it was a solo project, Into It Over It. And he always kind of does these cool things. He had a full length called 52 Weeks where he wrote a song a week and recorded all of them. He did one where it was just names of cities that he had toured and like a song about that city that he had toured in. So he's done a lot of really cool things. And this one is just a bunch of B-sides, stuff that they had recorded together, stuff that they put out with like comps and different EPs and different splits. And they finally put them all together on this one album that you can buy. And it's really cool. And I pre-ordered this album and got it 2 weeks ahead of time before it was even released. So I'm really excited to like dive into it. So
congratulations.
It's worth checking out. You can, thank you. You can go to their Bandcamp at intoitoverit.bandcamp.com and you can check out the album called Interesting Decisions. And it's a really fun, I think it's a really cool listen. Like, especially if you're a fan of stuff like this.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Good to know. I'm interested in their decisions.
Yeah. I like that.
I am recommending a YouTube channel. It's so nerdy. I guess I would like to qualify this by saying this is probably not for everybody, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. And so this is a YouTube channel. It's called Dice Tower. It's a board game YouTube channel.
Okay.
They do reviews, they do like playthroughs, they do rules, they do a lot of like opinion discussions. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a fun channel that just talks a lot about board games. So if you're interested in board games, they do so many different ways of talking about board games. Sometimes they'll do like, all right, here's our top 10 3-player board games. Here's our top 10 2-player board games. Here's our top 10 science board games. Here's our top 100 board games of all time. Here's like, they just, every single thing that you could think about that's related to board games, they do in some capacity. And so the Dice Tower is it's a fun channel that I recommend checking out if people are like interested in learning about board games or watching anything about board games, which like most people aren't, but like because they're so variable in the kind of things that they produce, maybe people will want to check it out. So anyway, that's it. The YouTube channel Dice Tower, they just talk about board games, and that's the thing that I talk about. So I like to watch YouTube videos about it.
Yeah, you like to share. You like to share your joys. I love that.
Yeah, I mean that's what recommendations are. It's just sharing our joys.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Is there anything else to add before we wrap up?
Nope, I got nothing else.
Okay, we'll see you next time for more addiction stuff, probably. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.